We have had the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, the red jurisdiction, of course, Soviet jurisdiction, all of that. NGT has similar jurisdiction, so and we are one of, I think, we were the third country in the world, which actually had a specialized court or tribunal to deal with environmental matters. And we created these authorities. And authorities, when I say not just the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Boards, but also you have a whole lot of authorities. For example, you have the Coastal Zone Management Authority, right? You have Central Groundwater Authority. You have the State Biodiversity Boards. You have the National Biodiversity Authority. So we have ensured that under all of these laws, we have these specific authorities, bodies, which kind of, ensure its proper implementation. What happens, unfortunately, many a times is you actually frame the law first, and then you expect the entire industry and the stakeholders to fall in line, and that may not be the best idea. The Supreme Court has done very well to kind of re-emphasize, reiterate time and again the environmental rights of people, the rights of people against climate change, and I think this will only get better from here.
In today's episode, we delve into the critical and ever-evolving landscape of environmental protection in India, often making headlines for its air quality and developmental challenges. India has also quietly built a comprehensive legal and institutional framework to safeguard its natural heritage. Our guest today is Nawneet Vibhaw, a distinguished environmental lawyer, author, and now an independent litigator with over 16 years of experience shaping the discourse on environmental law. Having previously led environmental law practices at top-tier firms like Khaitan and Company and Shardul Amarchand Mangal Das and Company, and having taught at institutions such as National Law University, Delhi, Mr. Vibhaw brings a wealth of knowledge and practical experience to our discussion. He offers a deep dive into the structure of environmental protection in India, from its historical roots in the 1970s to the specialized courts like the National Green Tribunal, alongside the crucial role played by the Supreme Court in upholding environmental rights. We'll also explore the intricate interplay between constitutional mandates, legislative acts, and judicial interventions in shaping India's environmental policies. He shares his perspectives on how India can further strengthen its environmental protection mechanisms through better training, technological advancements, and a greater sense of individual responsibility. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me today here. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Anirudh. It's my pleasure.
Sir, can we begin this conversation by first understanding from your perspective that first, how do you evaluate the current structure of environmental protection in India, and then maybe if you could lay out its strengths and weaknesses?
Sure. So, see, the way I see it is, if you talk about the environmental structure, so I understand that you kind of are pointing at the law and policy framework and all of that, right? So see, of course, this is something which started in the 70s when, India became a party to a lot of these international conventions and stuff. And the first law that we had in this country was the Water Act. And because there was a clear need which was felt to kind of ensure that we have some laws in place to protect the environment. And it started off with the Water Act, and subsequently, of course, we had the Air Act, and then the umbrella legislation, the Environment Protection Act. And the reason as to why we required the Environment Protection Act is because, a lot of the powers to frame these notifications and the rules and everything kind of, flows from there. And that's where the certain authorities get the powers to kind of, frame these laws and all of that. So that was, of course, very important. And subsequently, of course, after the EP, Environment Protection Act, we had a whole lot of laws, in terms of the notifications, laws in terms of, various rules, waste management rules, and a whole lot of rules. So I think if you see in terms of the law and policy framework in this country, I think we are one of the best countries in the world. And I say this, in a very neutral manner. I'm not saying this because, it's my country and we live here and, you have to kind of showcase your country always in better light and all of that. But I think we've done very, very well in terms of framing best laws, specialized, legislations, specific laws to address specific issues and all of that, be it waste management, be it biodiversity conservation, be it, forest protection, forest conservation laws. We have the best laws with respect to air and water pollution, and that also includes a whole lot of issues which are covered. You have something called the environment impact assessment notification, and when you talk about precautionary principles generally, I think that is a fantastic notification, and it has really done well to kind of ensure that you didn't have absolute destruction of the environment in the name of development. So I think and of course it has the 4 steps: screening, scoping, public consultation, appraisal, and all of that. So clearly, the local communities are actually kind of heard. Their concerns are taken into consideration before a project is kind of allocated and all of that. So if you talk about the laws as such, we have great laws. And similarly, what these laws have actually done is they have kind of also created a framework where you have something like a Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, okay, and then you have something called the Central Pollution Control Board, which is the authority which kind of frames the guidelines, and sometimes, for example, the color coding of industries, red, orange, and now of course you have one blue category also when it comes to waste management in January. So we had red, we had orange, we had green, and then we had white. These are the 4 categorization of industries. What has happened in January this year is we have had a blue category, and that primarily deals with the waste management, companies and all of that. So I think they've done fantastically well when it comes to the Central Pollution Control Board. Now, it was so well thought of and kind of, structured, is because while we created the Central Pollution Control Board at the central level, we also ensured that we have the state pollution control boards and the pollution control committees, in the union territories. So at the state level, you have the state pollution control boards, and you have the pollution control committees when it comes to the union territories. So what they are doing is, of course, when it comes to the day-to-day monitoring of, the activities of the companies and all of that, it's being taken care of by the state pollution control boards. So there, I think the most important aspect when it comes to environment protection and regulation is at the ground level, and that is where the role of the state pollution control boards becomes very, very crucial. And I think because on ground implementation is actually what matters. We could say that historically maybe we were not as good, but yes, in the last decade I think we've done very well, because when it comes to technical understanding of issues and all of that, I think there is better training of course it can always be improved, but I think the officials of the state pollution control board now have a much better understanding of what the issues are, how you deal with it and all of that. So what happens typically is you of course frame the laws, but to ensure that even the officials working for these authorities have a good understanding of the issues and how they're actually supposed to discharge their duties and all of that, that is a time-taking process. So that has been a process of evolution. So we've had great laws, then we created these authorities. And authorities, when I say not just the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Boards, but also you have a whole lot of authorities. For example, you have the Coastal Zone Management Authority, right? You have Central Groundwater Authority. You have the State Biodiversity Boards. You have the National Biodiversity Authority. So we have ensured that under all of these laws, we have these specific authorities, bodies, which kind of, ensure its proper implementation. So of course, great laws, a great framework for the implementation. The courts, for example, have done a great job, and of course, I can talk about that a little more in detail later. But I think we have had the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, the red jurisdiction, of course, so jurisdiction, all of that. NGT has similar jurisdiction, so and we are I think we were the 3rd country in the world, which actually had a specialized court or tribunal to deal with environmental matters, right? And historically we have done well. Of course, there are aspects which need to be improved. And to answer your question, I think if we talk about the framework when it comes to environment protection in this country, I think we have done very well. Okay, of course, and and leave it that, because of course then the question of implementation comes in, and I think that could be a separate question. Yeah.
We'll certainly delve into the implementation part of it, sir. But before we go there, I'm also very curious to understand how, because as in India, we have a complex interplay between constitutional mandates, legislative acts, and then again the judicial interventions, as you were talking about. Would you want to explain a little bit that how these 3 pillars intersect with each other? Maybe are there synergies, or at times you find them in conflict with each other?
If I have to answer your question in a single line, I don't see much of a conflict when it comes to environment protection, because I think the roles are very clearly demarcated. And so one thing which I think is very important, which needs to be mentioned here and also very crucial for India is most of the environmental laws that we have in this country are central laws. Okay, so and that I feel, it's my personal view, is actually a very good thing because that ensures that there is a uniform law which actually applies across the country. There is also a uniform, implementation, if I may say this way. Of course, it may vary depending on the state pollution control boards and stuff like that. So that was, of course, the idea that we had these great laws, uniform laws in the country. And I think, and as and when, there has been a need, our lawmakers, they have been kind of updating these laws and ensuring that we have, like I was mentioning earlier, that you have laws for specific aspects, right?
Yep.
So very recently, of course, we updated the battery waste management rules because we realized that the earlier law which we had did not even cover the various types of batteries. So of course you needed a law which kind of factors in all the technological advancements which are happening. So I think that ways we are doing a good job, right? And also, so of course one criticism could be that, if I may say this, that we tend to make the laws first and then kind of force the implementation where and force research and development also, where ideally it should be the other way around. Because, and why I say this is because many times if you talk to people from the industry, they'll say that, look, I think ideally the consultation should have been there and we could have seen as what are the, for example, if you take plastic waste, this consultation should have been there earlier and we should have seen what are the possible alternatives and then we should have come up with a law. What happens, unfortunately, many a times is you actually frame the law first, and then you expect the entire industry and the stakeholders to fall in line, and that may not be the best idea. So that is of course something which is a subject matter of consideration or discussion. But what I do appreciate is that, of course, to a great extent, the lawmakers have been proactive. Judiciary, if we come on to our judges, the courts, the National Green Tribunal, I think they've done a fantastic job. We've had green judges and green benches in the Supreme Court for the longest time. We've had all these cases, be it Forest, the MC Mehta case, and a whole lot of cases which have been going on for a very long time when it comes to air pollution, forest conservation management, and a whole lot of things. So, and I think many a times there are a lot of judgments, be it the judges of the National Green Tribunal or the judges of the Supreme Court, also high courts many a times. They've passed these orders where they've also held the officials accountable. All right. So if you're saying that, and that brings me also to the third, if you're talking about the bureaucracy, now what does happen, and since you mentioned about conflicts, what does happen is many a times, the implementation may not be as good as, say, the judicial order might expect, which is where we've had instances where, say for example, there have been certain costs imposed, or even officials, like in the past we've had instances where the salary has been deducted of a pollution control board official or whatever. So of course the idea is to create some kind of fear of the law. The idea is to ensure that it's a timely implementation, because in environment matters, if the implementation of certain things is not done in time, then it clearly has a very, very detrimental impact over the environment, on the environment. So those things are there. But I think if you see these statutory authorities, I think they're doing the job properly. We can always have the temptation to criticize them, because we always feel that certain things could have been done much better, or they could have been more efficient, or maybe certain things actually require more technical expertise, and maybe we need to train our officials better, and bureaucrats need to have a better understanding. Those things will be there always, because see, be it our judges, be it our politicians, be it our bureaucrats, they are all a reflection of who we are as a society. All right. So we can, and you and I, we can go on and on in a podcast or whatever, talking about, these guys are not doing their job properly. They should be more efficient. They should be better trained. But ultimately, we have produced them. We have made them sit wherever they are sitting. So of course, we need to respect our institutions. And I think to answer your question, there will be conflicts once in a while. But I think the manner in which our constitution makers have kind of ensured, the division of powers and whatever, so judiciary, of course, has its own job to do. Similarly, the lawmakers and, of course, the bureaucrats and all of that. So I think in the environmental context, it's working well. And I really don't see any reason to complain. Not yet.
And so would you want to take some time and maybe delve a little bit on the constitutional mandate as well? Because myself as a law student, I was very fascinated when I used to see a duty and a right at the same time about environmental protection. And I think a lot of our judgments have been inspired by that constitutional mandate. Would you want to highlight from your experience that how our constitutional mandate also helps in providing impetus to environmental protection?
Of course. So see, I think, like I said, that of course, the first environmental statute that we had was in '70s, right? But before that, you had a document, which is like, the most important document when it comes to the law and policy in this country, in the form of the Constitution of India. And if you see that, all the judgments initially, like, because so if you're talking about Article 21, for example, right? So Article 21, for your, of course, listeners, is a provision which, of course, talks about your right to life. And so very early, we have had these judgments from the Supreme Court, where they have kind of interpreted right to a clean and healthy environment as a part of right to life. And a lot of these judgments, be it the Supreme Court, High Courts, and later on, of course, the NGT, much later, of course, because the NGT came in only 2010, it has flowed from there. So I think the Constitution actually provided you with certain provisions, certain ways in which you could ensure that even if you did not have these specific statutes, you could still kind of talk about environment protection. For example, now if you're talking about 14, Article 14, all right. Now, Article 14 talks about right to equality. So equals have to be treated equally, unequals have to be treated unequally, and the idea pretty much is that, see, of course, when you say that unequals cannot be treated equally or whatever, and in an environmental context, it makes a lot of sense. All right, even because see, if we are a country where you have had these indigenous communities, you've had these tribal rights, tribal issues. All right, so when the Constitution actually had a provision which talks about right to equality and stuff like that, that was a great way to ensure that the rights of these people, the interests of these people are not compromised upon, right? Similarly, for every citizen, of course, you're talking about a right to clean, healthy environment. The most important part, since you mentioned, our duties and stuff also, so of course, we have had the fundamental duties and we have had the directive principles of state policy. And it was so well thought of, just think about it. And, so that's always the advantage of arriving at a party very late. You already know what's going on, and so I always say this, that be it in terms of ESG, like we of course came up with all of these things very late. So we already knew what was happening in Europe and US and all of that. Similarly, because we were a very young country, we could actually pick the best from the constitutions across the world. And I think, I think we were very fortunate, because the kind of people we had as the framers of our constitution, they're very wise, very learned people, and very balanced people, I would put it this way.
Yeah.
So of course we of course have these provisions which talks about the rights. You also have something, especially in an environmental context, you have something called a fundamental duty, right? Which actually talks about this, that if you're claiming these rights, then as a citizen you also have certain duties to ensure that you keep the environment safe. And I think for a country of this size and scale, the most populous country, if you don't talk about the duties and you don't emphasize upon the duties, I think it would be a disaster. So, of course, we have the provisions. I'm not too sure how many of us actually kind of still appreciate our duties. Of course, we are very, very particular about our rights, but that's the unfortunate part. And the directive principles of the state policy. So, where you have these guiding principles or directive principles, which actually says that what is it that the state is supposed to do to ensure that the environmental rights and all of these the things are actually taken care of. So I think the Constitution is a fantastic document, very balanced document, and I think it flows from there. So because if you see the environmental statutes also, right? So you are actually kind of talking about how to protect citizens and how to protect a whole lot of things. So if we are trying to do that, where does it come from? It of course comes from, say, an Article 21, an Article 14, and if you're talking about businesses, for example, right? So you have something called an Article 19, right? And so if you're talking about, say, for example, right to carry on your business and stuff like that, of course, there also you have certain reasonable restrictions, okay? And we've had this, the Kamalnath case, if you recall, you'd have studied in your environmental course, and then, of course, great. I mean, you're creating a resort, you're maybe kind of creating jobs locally, and, you're doing all of that, but that cannot be at the cost of changing the course of a river, for example, right? It cannot be at the cost of causing damage to the local ecology and, the flora, fauna, and all of that. So of course, we have to, as a developing nation, you have to kind of ensure that trade and commerce and all of that is taken care of, but it cannot be, cannot have a detrimental impact on the environment. So we've had all these provisions, 14, 19, 21, your directive principles of state policy and fundamental duties. And also, let me also add, the state list, the union list, the concurrent list. Now, at least then when they thought of, they knew that, these are certain aspects relating to environment which should be in the central list, certain other aspects which should be in the state list. And where they could clearly see that, both the state and the center has to have a say, they made it in the concurrent list. And it was very well thought. Of course, later on we've had these cases where certain states have said that no, look, this thing should be actually moved from the concurrent list to the state list, or from say the union list to the concurrent list. So those things, that's a process of evolution. The laws also evolved, right? But just if you kind of just start reading it, you'll realize that it's so well thought of. So fantastic document, and of course the constitution, the international instruments that India has been a signatory to, and all of that, and now of course a whole lot of legislations kind of addressing specific issues. Of course, implementation is where the challenge is, but I think we're very, very lucky to have these kinds of laws in this country. Yeah.
Now, sir, if we were to, now that we know that we have a framework which is very robust and which is well equipped to deal with situations as such, but we still see that there is a complex interplay of positive and negative developments. So to say, our alarmingly high QI levels, our polluted cities, but at the same time we see great positive developments in terms of rise in solar energy. We have also witnessed our increase in forest cover. But there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between some of these persistent negatives that we've been facing since decades, but also these positive developments. Where do you see the disconnect in these two trajectories? Because when you look at it from outside, it feels paradoxical.
So, see, I don't really see a disconnect as such. I'll tell you why. Because, see, like I was mentioning earlier, that we are, of course, a developing economy, right? And we clearly have our developmental imperatives, right? There are certain things which are non-negotiable. Okay, if you see the climate change negotiations, and so India has very clearly maintained a stand internationally that, look, we understand that, say for example, if you're talking about the thermal power plants, right, they are seen as polluting. We understand that it does have a detrimental impact on the environment. But if you tell us that we're going to shut down everything overnight and move to, say, solar energy, for example, that's not possible, right? We'll not do that. So we are clear about what is it that we definitely need. It's a necessity, right? But having said that, we also acknowledge, and if you see, I mean, to be fair to our government, we have to appreciate a whole lot of initiatives being taken by them when it comes to, say, cutting down on the water pollution, improving the quality of air and all of that, And so of course they're doing their bit, energy efficiency, waste management. There are a whole lot of schemes, because Prime Minister also has been kind of emphasizing time and again on the R's and recycle, reuse, and a whole lot of things. There are a whole lot of schemes, and he keeps talking about it in his podcast and stuff like that. So there is clearly the intent. The question is, like you very rightly said, that look, yes, at one point we're talking about, like you said, maybe green hydrogen, solar energy, clean energy, a whole lot of things, right? And of course, then for someone like me who lives in the national capital region, right, Delhi, you always on those. Of course, now things are improving, but in the early winters, you always every year you think that should I be living in the city, or if I have an option to move out somewhere else, whatever, change cities or whatever, because you know that you're actually breathing the air, which is actually kind of cutting down on your lifespan, right? So if say a normal human being who has good access to good health care and is doing well in life would expect to live for at least, like, say, 80 years maybe, right? But if you're in the national capital region, maybe it's been cut down by 10 years, or God knows what, I don't know. I mean, God forbid, get some really scary disease and you kind of pass away much earlier. But the question is, everyone knows what the problem is. Everyone also, and most people, I would say, also know what the solutions are. The question really is, how early, how quickly can we really get there? All right. Now, for example, let me take the example of pollution. All right. So we've had these whole lot of judgments being passed by the high courts, by the Supreme Court. I have appeared in a whole lot of cases for the industries, be it pet coke and whole lot of issues with respect to air pollution, environmental compliances, non-compliances, and all of that. So one thing is very clear: the courts, they are very, very strict when it comes to environment protection, when it comes to, improvement in air quality and all of that. They have pulled up the authorities and all of that, right? Are we saying that the authorities don't want to kind of do what is required of them? No. Of course, they are also kind of, trying their best. Sometimes it could be a resource issue, sometimes it could be a technological issue, sometimes it could be, I would say to a great extent, despite all these things, implementation issue. And when I say implementation, because, you are from Punjab and I live in Delhi, and when it comes to pollution also, we have a great connection, because, usually Punjab is blamed for the pollution being caused in Delhi. And so, of course, that's debatable, right? But then the question is, which I always emphasize, is as people, Delhi is like, it has more people than most of the developed nations also, in the world. The question really is, are people like you and I, we are going to make these lifestyle changes? We keep cribbing about the fact that, the air quality is so poor, and the whatever 2.5 PM 2.5 and PM 10 is so high. But if you tell me, or maybe someone else, that, today, why don't you use public transport and go to office, and, leave your car? The question is, out of 10 people, 8 will say no. I said no. I've worked hard to do whatever certain lifestyle, I cannot compromise on that. So that is where I think there is a great need to create that alternative infrastructure, and we've been talking about it. We have, like, these buses, public transportation system, all of that. Now that requires a whole lot of resources, that requires the political will, that requires, also I think, behavioral changes on our part. The question really is, are we doing enough? My simple answer is no. We keep cribbing about a whole lot of things. We actually kind of, blame the government, we blame the industries, we blame a whole lot of people. But as citizens also, and considering we are so many of them, like more than 140 crores or whatever, right? Are we really doing all that we are expected to do? Bring about those positive lifestyle changes? The answer is no. So I think, like they say, na, कि वो हम बदलेंगे तो देश बदलेगा, right? So the idea very simply is that, you have to be the change. I mean, like, if I may put it this way.
And so the important fact that you mentioned in your answer is about how proactive courts have been in pulling up authorities. Now, recently courts, like the biggest judgment that came on environment protection, or so to say climate change, which is M K Ranjitsinh, and some of the other judgments as well, which have been very proactive and I would say very progressive when it comes to prevention of pollution in Ganga. While these judgments seem very ambitious, these also happen to create ripple effect when it comes to how we view this problem. Would you want to highlight and would you want to take a moment and highlight the significance of these judgments? Because I believe in terms of not only how we are viewing is the problem, but also setting the discourse, judgment like these play a very pivotal role.
No, absolutely. So I think you're very right. See, the idea is that if you talk about the M K Ranjitsinh judgment, and I was, of course, the lawyer for the Solar Power Developers Association that time in my previous law firm, and we drafted whatever it was, along with, the expert report from certain wildlife institutes and all of that, where we kind of showed as to how, certain things can be done when it comes to the protection of a species and all of that. So of course that's the wildlife protection bit, whatever. But the larger question as to what it really does, and I think the judgment is a huge plus. So of course, because that judgment was also criticized by a whole lot of people, saying that, the judge could have done a better job and whatever. I see, it's a great judgment to start with, and I think it balances things in a much better way, because what it has done, and which will kind of pave the way, for a whole lot of judgments in future when it comes to protection of the rights of people against climate change and all of that. I think it's a great beginning. So I think, so it's not like we've not had judgments earlier which have emphasized the importance of adaptation, mitigation when it comes to climate change and all of that, of course. But this coming from the Supreme Court, and coming in a very important matter which talked about, the protection of the great Indian bustards, and you had a very crucial, I would say, issue involved when it comes to, renewables, solar power and all of that. So it was taken note of, and I think it was really kind of followed very well and publicized and all of that. I think this definitely is a very positive development, because it says that, look, whatever said and done, of course development is important, but then it cannot be at the cost of the rights of the people against climate change and a whole lot of things, adverse impact of climate change. Similarly, the other, I think, judgment you cited, that was to do with, I think, encroachment of, the Ganga floodplains and all of that. And see, so there are a lot of judgments like that. So I think that judgment which you mentioned, it's in Bihar, and a lot of these. You had a whole lot of illegal encroachments along the floodplains, and that clearly affected the flow of the river and a whole lot of species. I think dolphins, and you have these Indo-Gangetic dolphins. It was an endangered species. I think even now, I think it's fairly endangered. So the point is that, see, all of these things cannot go unchecked. And what the judgment actually does very well is kind of, it says that, look, that it cannot be like business as usual. You cannot be doing whatever you want. Similarly, we have had a lot of these judgments from the NGT, where some of these municipal authorities and the state pollution control boards have been pulled up. For example, you would know that we have had these whole lot of crores of fines actually. I mean, you call it environmental compensation or cost of remediation or whatever, on these authorities in Vrindavan and Mathura. Yamuna flows through that, and because you had a whole lot of these sources where effluents were being released in the Yamuna, right? And it's one of the holy rivers. So the point is that, see, because and this was despite efforts which were over the period of like months, where the NGT actually kept telling them that you are supposed to be doing X, Y, Z, and these steps have to be taken. They were not doing their bit, right? So to answer your question, I think we've had a lot of these instances where the Supreme Court, the National Green Tribunal, they've pulled up the authorities. And like I mentioned earlier, even we've had places in the past where certain official is not doing the job properly and their salary has been kind of deducted or whatever. So those things have happened. Now, and let me add, see, last year, in fact, this was, I think, in July 2024, the NGT actually asked the Central Pollution Control Board also as to how are you actually utilizing this environmental compensation which is being collected and all of that. And you will see it is very detailed affidavit, I think, which CPCB filed, and it says that about 500 crores were kind of collected through EC and all of that, and what has been really spent and what is it being spent on, so research and development and all of that. So the idea is that, see, the courts clearly have the teeth to actually kind of impose these kind of costs on polluting industries, also the authorities, right? The Supreme Court has done very well to kind of re-emphasize, reiterate time and again the environmental rights of people, the rights of people against climate change, and I think this will only get better from here. So I think it's a very, very positive development for a country like India that the courts are being strict, and they are also not just kind of defining and identifying your rights, but they are also kind of ensuring that even if it's a government authority, even if it's a statutory authority, they are being pulled up. Certain costs are being imposed, environmental compensation is being kind of recovered if they're not doing their job properly. So of course, if you're industry, you're kind of non-compliant, you'll be taken to task. Even if you are a government authority, a municipal authority, or whatever, you're not doing your job properly, you will have to kind of ensure that you get your act right and put your house in order. So I think the judiciary is playing a very, very important role.
And sir, if you were to plug some of these deficiencies or deficits, as you've mentioned, like things that could be improved on, what would your recommendation or your evaluation be? How would you see this environmental protection being more robust so that the deficit that we see can be improved?
So, see, again, it depends on the issues also, but largely, if you ask me, I've always said this, that, I think training, technological development, and also resource. So, if you see the current budget also, I don't know if you paid attention, if you see the allocation of funds when it comes to the pollution control boards and the statutory authorities and all of that, I think it may not be sufficient. I'll not say that it's less or whatever, but in a more polite way, I would say that, clearly these things have to be kind of focused upon. Because unless you kind of spend a certain amount of money on these aspects, you will not have the necessary, officials or infrastructure with the right kind of expertise, So you have to kind of ensure that, typical things, you have to ensure that your officials are properly trained, because if they're doing a certain kind of job, they should know exactly what are the latest advancement, what are the latest technological developments and all of that. They should do their job properly. They should be paid well. I always say this, because see, and we also had, I think, a very 2 or 3 days back, we also had this index where we stand in terms of corruption and stuff like that, right? So see, the point is that I'm not trying to blame anyone, but the question really is that if you have people who are in these crucial positions, if they have job satisfaction, if I may put it this way, like they're paid well, they're treated well, they're trained well, they know what they're doing, then there is no question of anyone kind of deviating from the usual course and or doing something which is clearly not expected of them or indulging in any kind of corruption, stuff like that, right? They're more motivated, they know the purpose, the reason as to why they have been put in a certain position, right? So those things of course are there. And if you have to ask me this question is to I think clearly we need to kind of train our officials well. And I think this shouldn't be just seen as a government job and where you're there, you're getting in. It should be seen as something where you have the opportunity to do much more for the larger good of the society, for the country, and all of that. So I think how you kind of convey this message also to the people who are in these important positions makes a lot of difference. So I think yes, technological, keeping them technologically updated, paying them well, training them well, providing them the necessary infrastructure, the necessary technology, all of that. I think it is required. So to a great extent, the government has done that, but I think we really need to do much more. If we compare ourselves to any of the other countries, I don't want to cite specific examples, but I think even the developing countries, there's some developing countries which are actually much better off than us, and we have the resources. So I don't see why, because see, ultimately everything kind of gets impacted by poor quality of environment. So we are seeing what is happening with respect to poor water quality. We have these diseases where people are dying in Pune and a whole lot of things, right? So it all kind of is related to water pollution and a whole lot of things. So yeah.
The one recurrent theme that I see in your answer, sir, is also about be the change that you want to see in the world, more so on those lines with respect to recognizing our responsibility in how we can manage it. So one more interesting fact that because I've been, like this is my 22nd, I've recorded 21 episodes till now. And one theme that, I've come across till now is also with respect to how we view environmental laws as such. Because a lot of debate in a lot of pockets of areas has also been with respect to the division that how environmental laws also legitimize pollution, legitimize harm in a way which is permissible. And then again, the question becomes if we are legitimizing pollution and then again it's not being implemented fully, the kind of harm that we create. But I think with your answers, we can make out that with respect to the responsibility that of course the government has to make it much more robust, but also on ourselves with respect to how we take on these challenges and do our roles. So before we wrap up, you've had an illustrious career spanning decades, and now you've shifted gears with respect to your roles as well. You are appearing, I believe, as an individual attorney, as a private attorney now. Would you want to reflect on your journey a little bit now that you've been an author, worked in law firms, and now working as an independent litigator with respect to environmental challenges and how you see your role with respect to dealing with these?
So I think you're right, because see, I think for me it was kind of I chose a practice area in India, which was environmental law, very early, and that was also kind of and in a lighter vein, in fact, my close friends and well-wishers also kind of warned me against it. They said, look, because like you, I mean, I studied at this law school, Nalsar, Hyderabad, my 5-year law, and then we were all very fortunate that in campuses we got all the 3 jobs we sat for and whatever, so we were, if I may say this, we were spoiled for choices then, because we had these so of course I started off as a typical corporate M&A lawyer, and but as a student, and also because my dad, my parents retired as professors, and my dad used to be a zoology professor. So I always had this somewhere as a child growing up, nature, animals, and all of that. So that somewhere, I think your somewhere your subconscious and all of that also kind of influences your path in your career and life. So environment was an area of interest, and gradually I kind of started getting pulled towards it, because I realized that no one was really kind of doing anything about it. And I went for a master's in the US even before NGT was established in India. I always say this. In 2009, I started my course in the US studying environment, climate change at Lewis and Clark, and I had a job offer there, but I came back because I realized that this is where you should be really doing what you have to do, and India always has had opportunities. So so of course worked with law firms, and then I realized that you of course learn much better if you teach. And so my reason for going to teach was also because I wanted to kind of prepare better to be an environmental lawyer, and also kind of maybe in law school I didn't pay the kind of attention with one course on environmental law in 5 years. So if I taught, and I actually ended up teaching for 4.5 years, environmental law, energy law, authored 3 books and all of that. So the reason it was a very conscious choice, and I have been very fortunate that I have always had the opportunity to do what I have wanted to do. So law firms, masters, gone back to teaching, came back to law firms, practiced environmental law, and if I may say this with all my humility, pretty much set up or streamlined environmental law practices in the firms where I have worked, right? So did that, and see, so the point is, and why, because people sometimes also ask me that, teaching, law firm, maybe independent practice, then again possibly law firm, why? Because I always feel that, if you, and this is of course in a lighter way, if you stay in a job for a very long time, you get into a certain comfort zone, all right? And this is of course not the best advice, but you should, to stay fresh, maybe every 4 years or whatever, you should try and think as to what am I doing and what should I be doing better. And even if you're in the same job, I think it's not always necessary. If you're doing the same thing which you're doing 5 years or 10 years earlier, then I think you need to really rethink, all right? So because the laws are changing, the society is changing, the industrial practices are changing, so you need to kind of be very adaptive. So I say this because and from environmental context, things have changed. So earlier people would ask, Acha, you practice environment, what do you do, right? Today you actually have a whole lot of people who actually kind of try and, I mean, if I may put it this way, learn from you, where they say, okay, they're trying to follow your career trajectory and kind of trying to kind of emulate in many ways, and that's a great compliment, all right? That's how I see it. But I genuinely feel that it's still very early stages for environmental law practices in India. So thanks to all the I wouldn't call it hype, but thanks to all the conversations around ESG and all of that, a lot of people have actually kind of joined the bandwagon, and they've been wanting to become experts and all. It's a good thing. The more people come, the more there is but I genuinely feel that in a country like India, in a jurisdiction like India, I think there is so much more that will happen when it comes to environmental protection, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to climate change disputes, when it comes to environmental disputes, arbitrations. So all of that will happen, and I think the collective consciousness of people will drive this. So I still say that, of course, I may have been practicing and teaching environment for 16 years, but I still say this is the beginning, and there is a lot more to come, especially in a jurisdiction like India. So if anyone is kind of looking at a career in environment, I wouldn't say environmental law, not necessarily as a lawyer. You could be a consultant, you could be a policy researcher, you could do a whole lot of things. I think you will not be jobless. That's how I put it. You will clearly have the opportunity to do good work, and if you're good at what you do, you'll always have opportunities to ensure that you create a positive impact. Yeah.
Good piece of advice for me as well as I navigate these torrential waters. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Very insightful discussion. I believe there's a lot of takeaways from this, and more so the focus that's bringing back attention to where it's required on us. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.